I think we've overlooked the magnitude of trauma that exists in the world.
Mm.
We certainly have been exposed to that from the refugees from Ukraine and Syria, and the war that they've experienced and the migration that they've gone through has been extremely traumatic on children.
Awekenge, this is Mental Matters, hosted by Asego Toto.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asego Dodo. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Many people experience trauma. They experience it in a lot of different ways. Many times they come up in very dysfunctional families. So parents who are drunk or high from drugs often will abuse children and harm children in various ways, sometimes sexually, but more often verbally and sometimes physically. Your folks out there may also experience domestic violence, or even something as profound as a loss or a divorce in a family can produce a significant amount of trauma. And it's not just depression, but more so dissociation, disconnection. And that happens in gradients. Certainly people that are dealing with PTSD, but people that are just dealing with adjustment disorders of divorce or death in the family or some type of major loss will often have a period of time where they just feel disconnected from themselves. And that's really what dissociation is about. But people can experience this as far as splitting in their psyche, what we used to call multiple personality, that we now call dissociative identity disorder. And this usually happens because of sexual trauma prior to the age of 8, or in cases of human trafficking where they have been subjected to so much abuse that the only way that they can survive is to fracture in their personality structure.
Thank you so much for that. And whilst you were speaking, and I remembered, I'm not quite sure if you are familiar with the movie Split, where it actually addresses the fact of that multiple disorder in terms of having multiple, I would say, multiple personalities, whereas this guy, I think he has more than 23 personalities, whereas I realize is a fact that as much as it is seen as an action movie, but at the same time, when you look deeply into it, it actually addresses the fact of trauma. And at some point in our lives, we actually create this barrier of having these different personalities that we are protective against other people. Whereas if one approaches us, we come with a different personality of a different, I would say, one thing that I realized, one would actually even create their own accent because of actually don't want to get deeply in that, don't want to actually experience what they experience. That I feel like that one of one of the things that are not, I feel like on my own perspective on for the longest time that I'm doing this, and I feel like they haven't been a lot of awareness on trauma and associating with in terms of one developing a lot of personalities.
I'm not sure where you were going with that. Sometimes people with different personalities, that happens really. It's unfortunate we pathologize something like this because it's really a defense mechanism. It's a way the body and the self protect themselves in order to survive a horrific trauma. And the healing of that is basically that you get the parts of self talking to one another, and it wears down the barriers between the different personalities. And as that information of what happened to them as they grew is shared between the personalities, they come together as one. So, the real message is that we can heal from trauma and that we can get well from trauma.
And I feel like in terms of my questioning towards you, firstly, in terms of you spoke about we can heal from trauma, and definitely we have a perception whereas we think that we can no longer heal from trauma, and I feel like that's where low self-esteem stems, because we have a perception that I will never heal from trauma. I'm not worth it. I will never treat from someone that you have worked with human trafficking survivor, you have worked with sexual abuse survivor, and they definitely at some point they told themselves the fact that they will never heal from that. How do we actually okay, let me rephrase my question. How in a way of, I would say, how can I phrase this question in a way? What is the... Come again?
How does one heal from that?
Actually, I'm looking for a way of actually phrase this question. Actually, here it is. Would you say that healing from trauma is a long life journey, or is just a journey?
It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Healing from trauma can happen in a matter of months or years, depending on when you get help for the trauma. In other words, when a trauma occurs, if you get yourself right into counseling or somebody gets you to counseling, and especially with somebody who's skilled and trauma informed, it's a relatively short time. Sometimes within a year, maybe a little bit less. But those who have been traumatized and re-traumatized and re-traumatized, what we call complex trauma, it takes much, much longer because you have to work through the layers of that, of what they've experienced in order to heal from that. I have a belief, though, I'm about to embark on some research. I have a belief that it can be shortened, when we experience tremendous trauma, we put all the really hard emotions, the betrayal, the overwhelm, the scary parts of this in a part of our brain that's locked away. It's called the implicit memory. And the only way that can open up is for that part of the brain to be triggered, which is why we have people who begin having memories that they don't remember, begin experiencing feelings and situations or seeing things that they don't remember as being part of their childhood. It's because something triggered that to open up and to reveal it. I think there are ways, and I'm looking into the possibility of using VR technology, virtual reality technology, as a way of triggering that open, which my belief is that it will cut the time of therapy at least in half, if not more.
And speaking about that, as our earlier conversation in terms of association of different, I would say, different personalities and trauma, in terms of building that defense mechanism, would you say that one that actually would you say that you, in a way of one, would be able to lower their guards and lower their walls in terms of that?
The walls thin and eventually go away by the parts working out the issues and the problems that exist between them. As they start working together, they start sharing information about what happened in this person's past. Once the person begins to have the information, the need for the separate parts goes away. And they integrate, they come together. Until, just like everybody else, all the parts work together as one.
Right, I got it. And to shift things away in terms of generalization, you have over 4 decades of working with survivors of sexual abuse, survivors of human trafficking, and trauma survivors. So through your work over these 4 decades, what do you believe that we have wrong in terms of things that we overlooked when it comes to trauma in general?
I think we've overlooked the magnitude of trauma that exists in the world. We certainly have been exposed to that from the refugees from Ukraine and Syria, and the war that they've experienced and the migration that they've gone through has been extremely traumatic on children, on adults. Wars in Africa, child soldiers have produced an amazing amount of trauma in the villages and in the cities. Nairobi, where they go to war, where the tribes war against each other and kill thousands of people, usually during election time. The last 2 elections, thank goodness, in Kenya have been peaceful. But prior to that, it was quite chaotic and very, very, very disturbing. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. Sexual abuse, domestic violence, drugs and alcohol in families are cancers on the ability to grow up in a healthy environment.
And you raise something that I believe that it's key to this conversation, which is environment. And for someone that actually been doing